Today, we're talking to Sagar Batchu, co-founder and CEO at Speakeasy, about all the ways they're simplifying APIs. You're listening to Joel Beasley, Modern CTO.
I saw what you were doing with Speakeasy and APIs, and I was like, that's kind of neat. I was hoping you could tell me about like exactly what that is that you're doing.
Yeah, maybe I should start actually with why I'm working on it. I've worked at a number of companies over the years and realized how much teams underestimate how hard it is to build a great API. APIs are not new. They've been around for a long time, right? Decades at this point, kind of core to software engineering and modern products. Everything we use around us is built on APIs. Every time we book a flight online, it's a bunch of API calls to all these platforms, and realized that there wasn't really a great de facto set of tools as a builder to go to. If you're like a UX designer, you go straight to Figma or Canva or one of these phenomenal platforms. For API builders, it's still the Wild West. It's a very unusual situation for something that's so widely adopted. So what we set out to do with Speakeasy is to create the de facto platform to help companies build, test, and distribute their APIs. We felt the hardest part of this API building process was actually getting the APIs out to your customers. Like, you spend all this time building it, but the adoption is kind of artificially constrained because of how hard it is to distribute the product to your end users. This is a problem builders see in like all kinds of industries, right? If you're building a consumer app, great, you've built this awesome app. Now, how do you get it into the hands of like thousands, millions of users? That's a hard thing to do. In SaaS, similar problem. With APIs, it's often the biggest challenge is actually the usability. Putting an API out there is like establishing a contract with your users that says, I'm going to give you X, or you're going to ask for X, I'm going to give you Y reliably, in a performant way, great uptime. But often users are left with very little information on how to actually build a product around your API, because that's when you get the real value out of it, is not just getting some information out, but you stitch the API into your own product. It becomes kind of a core service you depend on. And so that's a long way of saying one of the main thing that Speakeasy helps companies do is build, test, and distribute their API, make it really easy to actually get your users onboarded and using your API.
How long ago did you start the company?
Just over 2 years.
Okay. And why? You looked in the marketplace, you saw things that were out there, because there are some things that have been out there. Why did you decide that, okay, look, Postman's not going to cut it, this other thing's not going to cut it, I need to go build my own thing?
Yeah, great question. I think a couple different reasons. I noticed there was a lot of activity in the open source space, right? There have been open source projects that are quite popular, poorly maintained, but quite popular, that help companies create really great, what we call SDKs from an API, and distribute those SDKs. But it's a very much choose your own adventure kind of story. And so I felt that was a great basis to explore an enterprise offering. Like, that kind of, to me, was a really strong sign. There's thousands of companies out there relying on this thing that's poorly maintained. It solves a core pain point. It's got value. People are clearly investing time and trying to stitch this thing together themselves. But whenever that happens, like, I think that opens up a really great case for like a very solid, very well built enterprise product.
So you saw that opportunity, and then how did you come up with the name?
The name, I was actually living in London at the time, and it was deep COVID. And one night, my roommate and we noticed a light outside our house, and went over. It was a neighbor, and it turns out that he ran a little speakeasy. Obviously, it was COVID, so he wasn't running the place, but we formed a little COVID bubble with him. So we got access to the speakeasy just for the two of us, which was kind of a cool thing. And that was about when I was thinking about the company and ideating. That was the personal side of the story. The other side of the story is, I just like the word speakeasy. I mean, APIs are how people companies communicate with each other. And I just felt that was a nice play on words there.
That is a nice play on words. Was that the first speakeasy you had ever been to?
No, I'd been to others, but that was the first one I ever lived next to. That's for sure.
I found out about them in my 20s. I had traveled to San Francisco, actually, was the first time I had ever. And we were there for some conference, and some of the older guys, I mean, they were like 40. I was probably 20 something, and at least 21. They were like, hey, we're going to go to this thing, and we've got to get directions from this other guy who has the password and this other thing. And I was like, what do you guys do? Like a scavenger hunt. And then we went to this back alley, and there was this bookcase. It was this like whole ordeal. And I was like, there's going to be nobody here. And we get into like the back area, and there are so many people there. And that's my very first speakeasy experience.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, San Francisco does have a lot of them. And you know, the other thing was I just wanted a name that was pretty lighthearted too. I think a lot of tech companies have very serious names, and what we work on is deeply technical. We're like in the weeds of code generation and API documents all day. I think it's nice to have a more lighthearted name.
So what's the problem? We have a lot of technical leaders. Some are still coding, most are not. We have a lot of people that are managing tech teams. What type of pain are they experiencing that this might be a solution for?
Yeah, great question. So if you are building APIs at your company, either internally for internal users or externally for third parties and partners and customers, if you are experiencing pain around actually creating, updating, and distributing the API, so very concretely, you know, someone in your company probably maintains something called an API specification, which is the document that says this is what your APIs are. At that, and then from there are probably people or teams that take that API specification and create hand-rolled SDKs for your customers to use. And then someone else is involved in actually supporting those customers with any problems they run into. And that whole flow, that whole workflow is something we've seen a lot of teams struggle with in terms of staffing, maintaining, and then also ensuring that customers have a great kind of first touch experience. So what Speakeasy helps you do is it smooths over that workflow and solves this core pain point of, as an end user of an API, so your customer, they can come to your website, your GitHub, immediately get a pre-written, very high quality SDK to actually integrate with the API out of the box. That saves them, you know, days, weeks of integration time, and it builds kind of a great developer community. It's the foundation for a great developer community and consistency across how everyone is using your product. So that's the day zero core pain point. There's a number of other things that we do, but that's kind of the core thing I was, you know, talking to all the leaders here for them to think about.
So let's talk about how it expresses in their actual day-to-day life. Is it getting tickets saying your API sucks? Is it the API team being like way backlogged and not able to get like, you know, 80% of their work is fixes? Like what is the actual experience that this technical leader is having that might say, hey, it's our API sucks and we might need to do this better?
Totally. I think it's a great framing. I think there's a top line impact, which is exactly what you said, you know, customers filing tickets, support saying customers are churning off the API or struggling to integrate, taking too long. You know, an API is supposed to give a developer superpowers, but if it takes them weeks and months to integrate, then that hasn't really achieved the vision. So that's, you know, one thing for them to consider about, just artificially constrained adoption of their product. The bottom line is the time it takes their engineering teams to go from building the API to actually having it be usable for the customer. So raw engineering hours to take an API specification, build out SDKs, build out tests, build out all the tooling you need to actually ensure that users have a quality experience.
How long have you been writing code for?
Just about a decade.
Okay. What was the first API where you were like, whoa, this is so good. It's so much better than anything I've ever experienced. What was that first API for you?
Yeah, great question. I think it was, I think the first API was GitHub's API. I used theirs to build a product. It was almost not even a product; it was like a tool at one of the companies that I worked at, and it was fantastic. Just so well documented, great SDK. The time, what I like to call like time to 200, right? Time to go from
I get that. Yeah.
Nothing to your first successful call, and I don't mean that in like Postman or the ad hoc way. Like that's always easier to do. Like you just send off a request and you get something back. But like time to 200 in your first application was measured, I felt like under an hour, right? And that was just a phenomenal feeling, to especially as like a junior developer coming to the industry. You're like, oh my God, I can tell my team the app is working, right? This thing is giving me successful data back. So that, I think GitHub's was the first one. And then there's a couple others that have stood out over the years, like Stripes. Of course, Stripe has set a bar.
That's mine. That's mine. That's my answer. You took my answer from me.
Yes, a lot of people agree it's Stripes.
Yeah.
Twilio is another one. There's quite a few out there, actually. I often look at the like API top 100 list. Mm-hmm. It's a list that I think some VCs set up a couple of years ago, but it's basically top 100 APIs by usage, and they generally have good developer experience. Not across the board. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here.
We're gonna throw people under the bus in a second. That's the next part of this conversation.
Sure.
All right. So my answer is on best first APIs. You went with GitHub. My answer is Stripe. When I came across Stripe, I'd never seen anything like it. It was unbelievable. Now, worst API product that you've ever had to integrate with. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you first.
Okay, me first. It was called Authorize.net. It was before Stripe, and it was the worst API. Like, it would take you months to build against it. And even though there was abstractions in Ruby to help and all of this stuff, it was just such a horrible experience. And I remember the day I got into this project, this team was trying to hire me, and I said, like, oh, we're going to use Authorize.net. You have experience with it. And I said, yeah, I know it. I go, it's horrible. I said, I'm only doing the project if we can do Stripe. Once I found Stripe, I refused as an engineer to work on non-Stripe projects. Because I'm like, I'm not going to spend the money and waste my time to try to get this poor working API to work when I could just go to Stripe and it's like magic and it's easy and it's fast and it works. And I already had all the, payment management code and stuff I could just drop into new projects. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's small digression, but that there was a billboard on the 101 in San Francisco a couple of years ago from Twilio that said, ask your developer. And that's all it said. Right.
Yeah.
And I just like, this reminds me of that, because if an API is so good, like the point is your developer is going to come to you and say, let's use it. Right. Let's find a way to use this thing. And there was just so much like gravity in that statement to put that in a billboard. No context, nothing, right? This kind of reminds me of that, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure they did. That's why it was successful. They're like, what is Twilio,
Yeah. Exactly.
So what's the worst API that you've ever used?
Sorry, but I think it's going to have to be Workday. Workday's API, really bad. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. They'll get better. You got to tell people when it's not great. They don't know to get better unless if you tell them,
Yeah. I feel for them. Complex schema, super nested. I think like when I was using it, it was a SOAP API. They hadn't even made it to REST yet. Just like a terrible authentication experience. The documentation was just really tough to follow. As I said, the models were all really complex. Like I felt like I was always shuffling many IDs between API calls myself instead of just like working with a custom ID or request ID, something really simple to grok. Just a real struggle. I actually know a couple of friends building products on Workday, and like they keep asking us at Speakeasy to like, hey, can you guys build can your generator handle Workday? Can you build a SOAP SDK generator? Can you abstract this thing away for us? So I'll say Workday is the worst one I've used.
You said that some of your customers asked you could actually build like some type of wrapper and abstract it. Is that what you're saying that they've asked you to do?
Well, at the end of the day, one of the core issues is like the design. The API design itself is probably quite legacy and at this point difficult to evolve. Where we can help is because we do generate code and create these nice interfaces, like there's potential to give them a really nice like modern REST experience on top of, even if it is SOAP. There are ways to translate between, and they do have some REST APIs now that definitely could use like a really nice, language native experience to get started.
Yeah. Some of the problems with the companies is when they get really big and they come to a point where the founder's not there and it's basically just a bunch of bankers running it. The magic kind of leaves. There's not as much nonsense as if it was just run by a board of bankers.
Totally. Yeah. It's, I totally agree. You need that spark in product building, right? Like that craft. Like we talk a lot about craft at Speakeasy, about when we interview engineers, like we look closely at like, are they passionate about the craft side of things?
Give me a couple tips. What are some tips for hiring engineers?
Yeah, it really depends on like kind of where you are as a company and the kind of team you're building. But let's say startups, like founding team, I think it's just to be clear, it's such a hard thing to hire for. I think I have massive respect for people who have built big organizations. Some tips, I would say, something we've found that works really well for us is basically run contracting as like a interview process. So if you have the liberty to do so, like have your early people contract for you for a handful of weeks and turn them into full-time, especially for those, you haven't worked with in the past. Nothing beats like watching someone build, right? And taking the first few days to see how passionate they are, how quickly they're able to grok a problem, how much ownership they take on. Those kind of things are, I think, best assessed in like a couple-week contracting period. I would definitely suggest that. The other thing that we've found is, use engineering as marketing. So everything you do internally, your documentation, your changelog, these all become hiring artifacts, like kind of tools for you to attract candidates. It's kind of incredible how many candidates out there, how many great engineers actually look at company sites, look at the documentation, their product, and decide based on that, right? If they use your product and they see something that speaks to them, like that's going to be a strong reason for them to come talk to you. So at the end of the day, if you focus on the craft and kind of quality and the polish in your product and your external surfaces, like that's going to attract people. So I would definitely throw that in for a founding team.
Okay, you've used grok as a verb, like grok a problem. Like, can you break this down for me? I'm going to get a bunch of DMs about it after if I don't ask.
Sorry. Yeah. It's one of those developer words to basically say like, yeah, are you able to cut through the ambiguity and understand the core essence of a problem or a question? Like that's basically what it means.
Did it come from Grok, the startup, the guy that left Google TPU division?
No,
Grok
it's been around. I think it's from like, I don't know where it comes from. Maybe an XKCD comic back in the day.
Really?
I suspect. I feel like half the developer terms come from XKCD, but
there you go. Yeah, see, and that's just a perfect example of how you can be in something for 20 years and not come across a term. I guarantee we've done 1,000 episodes of the show. I don't think anyone's ever said grok a problem, but I believe it. Yeah.
I'll throw in another one so half of our team is based in London. And so they have their own like British developer lingo, which I find super fun. They always say nerd sniped. And that was one, I was like, what the hell is nerd sniped to me? Like one of the guys on the team, David, always puts in a stand-up like, I got nerd sniped today. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It turns out I think this is what it means. It means like you got deep into a problem and the problem kicked your ass, right? Like you didn't get anywhere with it. And so that means, nerd sniping is when that happens too. And I think it's also from an XKCD comic, but just somehow it's more popular out there.
It's an alternative to falling into a rabbit hole, right? Or going down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's very specific. It's like I went into the rabbit hole and the rabbit got me.
Yeah, the rabbit got you.
I got nerd sniped.
Yeah, you got sniped. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. Oh, that is so cool, man. Yeah. And are you having fun? Are you enjoying the business? Where are you guys at as far as growth? Do you talk about that publicly?
Yeah, I can talk about a few things. Man, it's so much fun. I think the days are long and the weeks are short, right? That's always how it feels. Like things are whizzing by. And as we go and as we've gotten traction, the goals get bigger, things get harder, scale. honestly, I feel like scaling is more challenging than PMF. Not claiming we have perfect PMF. PMF is like a constant iteration, constant story. But as the company has grown, like, yeah, there's so many super fun challenges every day across product, hiring, customers. And yeah, I feel like I am living off the adrenaline every day of all the stuff going on. So absolutely loving it. I think in terms of traction, yeah, this year has been kind of an amazing year for us. Started the year with pretty minimal revenue, to be honest. Like we had done a seed fundraise last year, kind of seed level revenue. And this year we're in 7 figures ARR. So it's been like a very rapid growth path for us. And have been super lucky to work with kind of some of the fastest, best companies in the Valley, as well as some larger, very foundational established enterprises as well. So I think we're seeing kind of a really ubiquitous customer base appear. And I think we're realizing like this is our opportunity to lose, right? Like it's actually coming down to how well we execute and we are able to build a business. So yeah, traction is good. I think I'm also excited because this business is basically so far built completely on inbound sales. So people, coming to our site, seeing blog posts, discovering us through other customers. And that's for startups, enterprise, like companies of all sizes are showing up at our door, which for me feels that we're pretty close to finding this like big problem to solve. So if we're able to keep throwing fuel on the fire there and have people come to us, that's fantastic. Like that's even before we've really built an outbound sales motion or anything like that.
What type of blog posts are attracting the people's interest?
Yeah, so since we do a lot of work with API libraries and code gen, we do a lot of posts on like API design, how to work with Open API, which is a complex ecosystem. The other things that attract a lot of posts are like the this versus that posts. So for example, we did a big release on like Python generation recently, and under the hood, we use something called HTTPX. It's a modern HTTP client for Python that supports sync and async together. And so we did a post on like HTTPX versus Python requests, which is the traditional HTTP library built into Python. And so that post has been flying. And I think it's just that there's a lot of people out there searching, who are like starting projects, who are searching for, should I use HTTPX or should I use Python requests? So those kind of blog posts do really well for us.
Nice. And then when people use your product, they can tell it's like made by Speakeasy, or so that you're getting some branded intros off of that.
Yeah. If you go to one of our customers, SDKs, pip install, npm, Maven, whatever, you get that SDK. If you open up the code, you can actually see, we keep it very limited because our goal is to like help the companies make a branded experience, but there are obviously little badges, tags that you can see as us.
Yeah, which actually builds trust too, right? So if I'm a developer and I'm using an API and it was built on Speakeasy and it was a really good experience, next time I see an API built on Speakeasy, I'm going to associate that.
Totally, yeah. That's I'll say it's an amazing inherent virality. It's also a double-edged sword too, right? It puts, I think, a good kind of pressure on us to make sure our customers are maintaining the API as well.
Nice. Well, we talked a lot about APIs, worst APIs, best APIs, what you guys are doing in the marketplace. What's the thing that's getting you up out of bed today? Like, what are you really excited about?
These days, I'm getting out of bed thinking about all the new products that we're building, and also kind of the very timely nature of when we're doing it in the market. So we started with this kind of core problem of helping companies build out the SDKs and distribute the API. And I think it's given us a right to expand and a right to help customers with more problems. So we've been pushed into thinking about testing, webhooks, actually runtime for APIs, and giving people really quick ways to deploy. There's just this massive, very like fertile product surface for us to go expand into. And what's really exciting now is like us figuring out the right phasing to go do that. Like that's the job to be done, and that's what's exciting to me. There's no limit of problems we can solve in our space. It's actually a question of like what order and how do we phase this to be effective as a business while also delivering value? So it's really this like company building that's starting to come together for us. That means we've got to figure out what to build, who to hire, how to stitch that whole fabric together effectively. I just find that super fun, super exciting.
I've been particularly excited about AI agents and how they're going to be using APIs. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, totally. That was the other thing that I think that is getting me out of bed is there's just so much happening in this space, and in the Valley, I think it feels like we're pretty deep into it, but actually we're in like inning zero, right? Like you go talk to an enterprise, and the chasm between POC and production usage is massive, right? Like very few companies have actually deployed AI agents for API integration at scale. Like I think close to zero. And so there's tons of exciting stuff happening here. There's also really exciting stuff happening in like the IDE and Copilot space. GitHub just opened up early access for Copilot extensions. Like pretty soon, you're not gonna have to go to an API doc site to figure out how to use the API. You'll just open up VS Code, type /API name /Stripe, and then suddenly you'll have a whole toolkit at your disposal to start integrating the API. There's just tons of stuff happening because of the Gen AI revolution we're going through. I think, as I mentioned, it's definitely inning zero. I think there's tons to be built. It's not clear where it's going to go. I think like who the winners are, what the new paradigms are going to be, it's all still up for the taking.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how payments are going to work, because these agents are going to need.
Yeah,
I saw somebody on Twitter actually saying that they're mocking out a agent's payment API and asked people in the comments like what they would want most out of it, because we're so used to going to the website, browsing, signing up, making phone calls, having a meeting, doing a contract. The companies that somehow figure out how to make it so that an agent can autonomously like just go up to the API, consume it, and then use it, and there's some payment type system associated with it. Those companies are going to do the best because everyone's going to build to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. And it's kind of funny. I think the best APIs today will also be the ones that agents are able to use most effectively. Yeah. So there's like a compounding value here of everything we've been talking about, of like good and bad APIs, and then also what's coming on the corner.
Have you personally seen anyone build API calls that are specifically designed to be useful to AI agents?
Funnily enough, no, I have not. And this is like something I've been searching for. We've been doing our own research into like what that would be. The one thing that I am definitely sure about is that in this world where agents are actually constructing calls, the one thing that you do need to really invest in as a company is have a great API specification, right? Like, let's say REST APIs, your open API spec needs to be solid, because that is the bare minimum that's needed for an agent to understand what requests available, what are the, just the information needs to actually do HTTP request construction. And it's also what you need today to do more traditional request construction by hand. But that is like the number one thing that a company can invest in: have a great open API spec and a process of updating it, change management, dealing with breaking changes. Like that's still going to be super important here.
And so do you guys do just documentation? Like for some people that just have an API and they just want a system to document it, do you handle that?
We don't do pure documentation today. We integrate with docs providers like Mintlify and Scalar are two that come to mind. We generally try to fit into an existing ecosystem, but the docs just hasn't been our focus. And I think that there are great vendors out there like the two I mentioned.
And what's the way that people get started? Like, do you have it set up to where I can just go download it and try it for free, or do I have to talk to a salesperson?
No, it's absolutely self-service. We have a very kind of generous free tier. Go to it, download, get started, built-in quick start command. Even if you don't have an API spec, we give you one to start with. And then the idea is in like a few minutes, you could have a fully hosted great SDK on GitHub for your API.
Nice. I want to touch a little bit more on what we talked about with like the consulting hiring. What type of, like during that consulting period, what are the behaviors that stand out to you? So when you see this happen, you think, okay, this person is definitely going to get a full-time offer.
Ooh, great question. Couple of key things. I think first and foremost, velocity, right? That the person's able to show. And I don't just mean like amount of code pumped out or amount of product built. That's obviously important, but also like velocity of decision making. Like how are they able to get through these decisions we have to make with very low amounts of data and input? Do they have like an instinct around it? Like, do they balance both getting perfect data and instinct? Like that's super important what we do. Like you can't wait around to have all the answers given to you by customers or anyone else. You need to operate a little bit on intuition and instinct too. So like that, I think that's super important to me. I think another thing is, communication, how well they're able to communicate these concepts. At Speakeasy, we do something called RFCs, request for comment. It's kind of core part of engineering culture that helps us work in this kind of hybrid environment we're in, but also I think really helps engineers stand out in terms of showing, how they're able to scope and grok a problem and use grok again.
There we go.
How are they able to communicate a very complex set of thoughts, right? And then the last one, I think, one thing, and this is more personal for me, is like customer support, right? How are they able to, like, are they happy to like jump in the line of fire, right? And get involved on like customer questions in Slack and other locations, like, that to me like shows ownership and wanting to own things end to end, right? Like all the way from the customer to code and back. Like company at our size, that's super important. There's no reason for us to create kind of artificial barriers between the customer and ourselves.
So you've not always been a founder. You've been an employee before, correct?
Absolutely.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've made as an employee?
Good question. Made a lot of mistakes, to be honest.
It's good. You got to that's how you learn.
That's how you learn, yeah. I think one thing that comes to mind is like focusing too much on process as an employee, like especially when you're at a bigger company and it's growing. Like the last company I was at grew from like, 100 something when I joined all the way to 1,500 plus when I left. And it's very easy, I think, to get bogged down into like trying to figure out what the perfect way to run a project is, or like, achieve any task rather than just doing the thing and focusing on the outcome. I think that's one mistake I've made multiple times.
Yeah, I made a mistake where I'd build tools before hiring people to manually do it to make sure that like we understand how it works. Interesting. Focusing too much on process. I think we've all kind of I think everybody that's been professionally working for 10 plus years has gotten into that trap. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of easy. I think it plays into, especially an engineering mindset of like wanting to think about things as like a system and try to map out like who's involved and how do you achieve this, versus like not forgetting that you're a builder and you're a product person and your job is to like figure out how to make the customer successful. Like I think I keep reminding myself that here now too, like especially now we're starting to grow and hire a little bit more, like not get too caught up in process. Like it is important to have like some structures in place as you grow, but I think what's more important is like clarifying vision and goals, and everything else kind of falls in underneath that, right? Like you don't need to build the system bottom up and stitch, tell people how to work and how to organize themselves. If you I think set like a really clear vision, goals, and what we want to achieve, then the systems kind of shake themselves into place behind it.
Yeah, I found at my business, of all the processes that we've tried and played with over the years, the core two systems, when I walk in every day, I'm like, how many meetings do we have being booked? And because you can't have a close, you can't have a proposal without a meeting. So that's like first and foremost, keep those meetings high, and then look at proposals sent, deals closed. And then, I mean, that's just important because I've said this a bunch of times, but there's no magic paycheck fairy. Like your employees are getting paid because you're doing something useful to the marketplace. You're making people's APIs better. You're giving them a better experience. You're reducing their churn. You're doing all of these things. And they're like, take my money and help us do this. And then you use those resources to employ people. And I know it sounds silly for me to say it, but you'd be surprised how many interviews I've done with people who are like off the record that they don't actually understand like how paychecks get made.
Yeah, totally. I map that to our world, and I completely agree. Like, where we are as a startup, the only two things that matter are top of funnel, right? How many people are finding out about you? And then the other end of it, like customer success, or like happy customers, right?
Yeah.
And then everything else, even product, like it kind of just, it figures itself out, because those two things are like the input and output of the system kind of working together.
Yeah, and then culture is kind of like your quality of life and how you do things. And if you nail that right, you get really good people, and then you're also good at managing the very few KPIs that truly matter. That's a pretty good indicator of success.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stuff is super interesting to me personally. Like, what you focus on as a business kind of, I think, either first of all decides whether you're successful, and then decides whether people are happy doing it.
Well, hey, it's been great getting to hang out with you and chat with you. I want to make sure that we do a call to action for people to go sign up for Speakeasy, put their hands on it on the keyboard, get to experience it for themselves. Where do they go? What's the website?
Really easy, speakeasy.com. And you go to speakeasy.com, you can log in with your Gmail or GitHub and get started in just a few minutes. If you have an API, that's great. Bring it, and we'll work with it. If you don't have an API, we'll give you a starter to get started. We want to make it super simple for you to take your API and build out the best possible developer experience for your end users, and get that hosted and running in just a few minutes.
I love it. Your branding's beautiful. We've got similar colors.
Yes,
match made in heaven.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this episode useful, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would get value from it. And if you have topics that you'd like to hear discussed on the podcast, either add me on LinkedIn or send me an email, joel@moderncto.io. Every time I get an email or LinkedIn message, it absolutely makes my day and inspires me to keep going.